Don't tell everyone, but it turns out blogging has not disappeared. Calling all the old school bloggers like me, maybe you've been blogging for more than 20 years. I started in 2003, and here I am pretending to be young on TikTok. But actually, if you go over to Substack, that's basically the home for blogging. Blogging as it used to be. Blogging where people are respectful in the comments. Blogging where you can meet people who've thought things through and written careful thoughts, and then you engage with them and tell them where you think you're wrong or where you think they're right. And I'm so excited. I feel like an old friend. Changed their name, moved away, we lost contact, and suddenly I ran into them almost by chance. I've joined a secret society. Shh, don't tell anyone. Shh. Okay, you can tell other bloggers if you like. Well, hello, Substack. I kind of feel like I've just joined a semi-secret club, like a society that I kind of vaguely knew about, but for some reason I'd been left out of, and nobody had invited me. Now, it turns out that several of my friends from Facebook, readers of my blog over on Pathos, people that I've read over years on and off, and most importantly, some of the old-time bloggers have been hiding out here in this little corner of the internet. And like many clubs, of course, it seems like there's some rules that I don't understand, and I'm not quite sure whether I'm supposed to do videos or write posts or both. I'm also not quite sure whether to just reproduce material that I also publish at Pathos, do something new. But here's the thing that has really interested me. As a blogger since 2003, yes, I still use that word. It seems to me that possibly over here, the spirit of the blog lives on, because the person who I kind of noticed had a Substack was somebody I ran into in a Facebook forum for writers who, well, without wanting to put too fine a point of it, was somewhat critical of my books. Now, of course, increasingly online, in other forums, we're insulated from such criticisms, and we're actively encouraged, herded even like sheep, into our little bubbles. Those little bubbles are self-reinforcing. And to be honest, there's a huge part of me that pines for the early days of blogging when we were able to interact with each other, Christians particularly, but other groups I'm sure as well, respectfully. And you would write something, you would put it out there, you would expect and get, frankly, quite bold and strong criticism at times. I don't think I was by far the only one who actually welcomed that in the early days, because we wanted to understand each other. We wanted not to build a straw man argument, but to actually interact with people who had different perspectives to us, different views to us. And the comment sections lived. They weren't full of flame or just sycophantic, it's amazing what you've written. They were actually kind of helpful. And I can't tell you the number of times I wrote things, and perhaps this is something that I will think about sharing over here in a sort of rejigged format, but I wrote things about the spectrum of different Christian views and how actually instead of pitting ourselves as one camp against the other, we should understand that actually if you're a moderate from one particular camp of a theological position, you're probably closer to a moderate from the other camp than you are an extremist in your own. Anyway, specific to the person who, well, they didn't exactly invite me over here, but I kind of noticed somehow in their Facebook profile, I guess, that they had a Substack. And of course, I've heard of Substacks, and I've probably even read individual articles before, but I've never taken the plunge. Here I am. I'm a bit of an odd character, but you'll see that just like with those spectrums where people would criticize me and say, you haven't represented our camp correctly, and I would go in and I would edit and try and make sure I did represent that camp respectfully. I hope you'll find that, as I've found so far looking in the Substacks since taking the plunge, comments and commentary that's actually helpful, that actually interacts, that says, oh yes, but have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? I do like what you're saying, and have you considered this though? So, I don't know, perhaps Substack will be a new place for me where we can interact and learn from each other. I hope that's true. It seems like that's the culture around here, as opposed to Facebook, which I don't know, what's that become? And X, well, the less said about that, the better. But as I say, I've not been here, and if you're one of my friends or people I've interacted with in the past, shame on you for not inviting me. But I'm here now. And just to tell you a little bit more about myself, and then I'll shut up. That is that I originally trained and worked as a medical doctor, so I have quite a bit of scientific training. And actually, at some points in my career, for over a decade actually, I worked in the pharmaceutical industry, helping to run the clinical trials that give us new medications, also helping to interpret and explain the results of those trials, both within the company and in scientific forums, and obviously working alongside sales and marketing people to try and keep them in check, really, make sure that the claims they made were consistent with truth. And, you know, when you are a scientist, then truth matters. But I best not get started on that, because unfortunately, many people seem to think we live in a post-truth world, whether that's because of politics, whether that's because of the media, old and new, or whether that's because of AI, which doesn't seem to care whether anything's true, just whether the user wants to hear that. Itching ears, anybody? But as well as my scientific training as a doctor and my work in that field, I spent a good 8 years, I think it was, working as a psychiatrist in the UK's National Health Service. So the medical aspect, I would call that a biological aspect. As a psychiatrist, you obviously are working in that medical field as with drugs, but you're also clearly working in the psychological field, working closely with therapists and psychologists and counsellors and social workers though as well. So we go into the social aspect, and you learn something about that when you're working in that field. But I tell you what, you understand it all a whole lot better when you take the step from being on the giving end, if you like, of medical knowledge and help and support and all of that, to actually becoming a patient. As well as my medical experience, so that my psychological experience as a psychiatrist, so the mind, I don't really know how to say it apart from say I experienced a social meltdown in every aspect of my life after I developed blood cancer. Whilst that was successfully treated, and they've told me it will come back, almost certainly will come back, it also led to a lot of damage to my body, and I've experienced chronic illness since 2017 that's prevented me from working and acted like a tsunami, basically bringing destruction into every area of my life and interaction with others. So I had to medically retire, and had a big impact on my relationships and all sorts of other things. I don't want to go into that right now any more than that, but obviously that's given me some understanding of the social aspect. And interestingly, my wife of nearly 3 years now is a qualified social worker, and I've watched her train to be a qualified social worker during the time I've known her. So I got some understanding of that as well from talking with her. So that's bio, psycho, social. So far so common really amongst doctors certainly, and psychiatrists very definitely, and people working in mental health more specifically, and trauma and such like. But there's a fourth area that often gets neglected out there in the secular world, and that's the spiritual. By that, it's just over 2 weeks since I joined Substack, and I'm still just as excited as I was at the beginning. And it's been really quite a learning experience for me to learn a new site, to learn all about the difference between restacking with notes, comments, and of course articles as well. Not to mention videos and podcasts. And I've worked out how to also host my podcast on their platform. You can actually use it as your primary source for your podcast, or in my case, you can feed an existing podcast into it. But it's another platform that you can use. What I've realized is that for many of you, if you're, for example, running a mailing list at one of the other sites like MailChimp and all the others, many times you have to pay for that. At Substack, it's free. You can run a mailing list and your subscribers can be moved across. They don't even have to create an account, although they will have the opportunity to do so. So it's possibility of turning your mailing list into a sort of interactive forum for those who want to join in and comment. And it really is, as I've said before, just like the early days of blogging. So you can run an email subscription list there. And if you're already paying for that somewhere else, I'd consider moving it across. You can host multiple newsletter style publications there. Those can have separate email lists, separate websites. You could even collaborate with other people if you want. But most importantly, it's a way to build a direct relationship with some of your new viewers. Interestingly, I haven't found too many people there who already know me from Twitter, Facebook, my blog, elsewhere. Most of them are new readers. I've gathered about 100 of them, or just over 100 of them, in a couple of weeks. And 3 of those have already said that they've bought my book, which is quite a encouragement, really. And more importantly than any of that, though, is just a sense of interaction with like-minded people and people who's perhaps slightly different in your thinking. And it really is just like the early days of blogging. So I am very pleased to be on Substack. But don't worry, I'm not leaving Patheos, and I'm certainly not leaving TikTok, and I'm not leaving Facebook or X or any of these places. But I think Substack feels like a home for me, more so than any of those other places, apart from perhaps Patheos, of course, which will always be the home of my blog and the primary place where you can get my polished articles. But if that's not enough for you, you want more of Adrian, then head over to Substack.